V, V, T, 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 V, V, T, Q, V,
Text videos. Text videos. Featuring Dr. Elizabeth Colantuoni.
Hey, so today we're fortunate to have Elizabeth Colantuoni, who's a senior scientist in the Department of Biostatistics, who has done a fair amount of teaching at the school during their tenure here, but was recently, because of COVID, like many of us, forced to take a course that she was planning to do on campus, and actually had done one term of on campus and transitioned the follow-up term online immediately. And so she is here to share some tips that she learned and introduced to her course about engaging students in this transitional online environment. So welcome to this discussion, Elizabeth.
Thanks for having me, John. It's been a lot of fun to think about the successes and failures of teaching online.
Exactly. And both of those will be very useful for those of us moving forward and doing the same thing. So tell us a little bit about your course, like who is the audience, how big is it, et cetera.
Yeah, so the course is about 35 students. About a third of them are master's degree students in our department, the Biostatistics department, but then we have the rest of the students representing both PhD and master's level students from other departments around the school. It's designed to be like a calculus-based and linear algebra-based statistical methods course, so regression and data analysis and those sorts of things.
Excellent. So a quantitative course. And how did you run it prior to having it taken online? How was it set up, and what were the opportunities for instructor-student engagement?
So it was a very traditional structure. So me coming in and lecturing, I tried to incorporate short exercises for the students during the lecture time. So I would ask them a question and then give them a few minutes to work on it and then review that together. And then otherwise, students were easily able to ask questions, interrupt me during the lecture. And then I would engage with students before class, just checking in to see how they're doing. And then I would give a break halfway through class. So I'd chat with students then, and then always the time after class. And then we also have a laboratory section that would be half instructional and then half kind of an open work time for students.
Did you have other lab instructors?
Yeah, teaching assistant would be teaching those, and then I would attend so I could help address questions. And then during the independent work time, me and the TA would walk around and answer questions and help group individual tables.
Got it. So would you say that your synchronous opportunities for engagement with students were centered around these live class times, like you said, before and after class or in discussion, et cetera? And outside of that, how did you communicate with students? Was it
so we used I used Course Plus for the course, but we chose to use Slack last year for the discussion forum instead of the Course Plus discussion forum. So students could engage with me or the TAs or themselves or with each other on Slack. And then I was sending notifications and posting announcements about course materials through Course Plus.
So when you were forced to suddenly drop everything and move it to an online situation, what did you hope to replicate about the on-campus course wherever possible? And what did you need to think about upfront about how to reset or adjust things in terms of keeping or trying to keep similar levels of student-instructor engagement moving forward?
Yeah, so the lecture times stayed live, and I recorded them. And I guess I should mention that during the pre-COVID time, that I will lecture with a tablet. So it's like a combination of slides that I've prepared, but with blank slides where I can make derivations.
Oh, so you could be annotating on the big projection?
Yeah, so I'm annotating on the projector, and then I save those annotations and provide them to the students for their own purposes after. So the lecturing component basically stayed the same, and the in-class short exercises stayed the same, but we were all just like virtually online with awkward pauses. That worked very well, I think, in the online environment. And it didn't hurt that I already had relationships established with the students. So people were willing to, interrupt me while I was lecturing, or put questions in the chat. And so I just had to get used to basically kind of lecturing, but also monitoring the chat and taking pauses so to give students opportunities to ask questions.
And did you advise them on how to ask questions? Did you prefer if they spoke out loud, or did you ask them to put them in the chat so that or were you sort of going with whatever worked at that time?
I was really leaving that up to the students' comfort levels. It seemed like certain students were willing to audibly speak up and say, excuse me, Dr. Colantuoni, I have a question. And other students were more comfortable putting questions in the chat. And so I really just kept the door open for whatever students were most comfortable with, which I think worked well.
Did you notice, I'm just curious, since you mentioned this, if you were teaching live before and certain students were less likely to speak out in a classroom, did you notice a difference in the rate of questions asked when they had this other opportunity to do it sort of not anonymously, but do it without speaking live, if you know what I mean? Was there, you think for some students the chat provided a portal to do this that they wouldn't have been able to access in the live classroom?
Yes, I do think that's accurate. So in the in-person setting with the students who are less likely to engage during class time, that I usually use the break or after class to, make eye contact and physically get close to them and ask them how things are going in the course. And that usually opens an avenue for some engagement. But I do think that those students were more engaged with the chat.
And how did you manage this extra layer of monitoring? Was it something where you were able to pin the chat window as part of what you saw on screen, or did you constantly have to remind yourself, like I've done, you constantly have to remind yourself, oh, I've got to go find where the chat window is, if that makes sense?
So I pinned it on my view, and then I had to get used to placing it in locations on the slide because I was also actively annotating. Yeah, there became a weird corner where I would never write on the annotated slide because that's where I was viewing the chat. During the laboratory sections, I would also attend. So the teaching assistant would be leading the main discussion, and I would monitor and answer questions in the chat. And then I would only interrupt the teaching assistant if there was a question that I thought that they could address to the larger group. And so
it's on a rolling basis, even if the teaching assistant was giving a presentation, if a student had a question, they could triage it to you and get an answer in real time.
Yep.
And that was different than when you were doing the lab live, right? Because
occasionally if the student asked the TA a question and then I thought I had something to add, I would also engage in that discussion. But for the most part, I let the teaching assistants answer the questions. But I thought it was just for people who are new to teaching in front of a crowd, that it would be easier for them to focus on the material and I could take over answering questions in the chat.
That's great. And did you talk to your teaching assistants about this? Did afterwards debrief on it? Did they like that approach? Or?
I didn't ask them. I probably should have.
I assume
I usually would start the before we started the recording. I would let the TAs know that I would answer questions that popped up in the chat.
Great. So let me ask, did you use, since you did this in your live lectures where you had students work on exercises at least once a class, that sort of thing, and where you did the labs where you did a combination of didactic and then them working sort of with each other or independently, depending on how they preferred to do it, I guess. Did you use breakout rooms for these in your class?
No, I was just trying to get through the change in design and having my children at home teaching and like doing online learning too. retrospect, I would do that.
Think they would be advantageous for this? And do you think it would be pretty, given what you know about breakout rooms now and having been a participant in breakout rooms, for meetings and that sort of thing, do you think they would help with the individual student-to-student engagement?
Yeah, and then myself or the teaching assistants could go through, like pop in and out of the different breakout rooms if we needed to have more than 2 or 3 to address questions. And then students now know that if they're in a breakout room, they can ask for help. And so things like features of Zoom like that, I would definitely have used.
And what about the asynchronous, like through Slack and your communications via Course Plus? That's something you had monitored closely before, even when you were teaching on campus. Did the sort of activity levels on that change, or did you change your relationship with those approaches to because of the change in setting for the course?
I don't think, I think that myself, I try to very actively monitor that during a typical time. And so I don't think that I spent any less time or more time monitoring it. I try to be really responsive to the students on those forums when I can, just because they're typically involved with their data analysis assignment or, working through a problem. And if they get stuck, I like to quickly nudge them along. I think I asked the TAs to help me a little bit more with the discussion forum monitoring, just because my attention was being drawn in different directions. Yeah.
So in some ways, it sounds like you were able, with alternative approaches, keep the same types of interactions, both synchronous and asynchronous, that you had when you were teaching live, but it may have required a little more work on your end in terms of keeping everything going.
Yeah. And then everyone was experiencing such a weird time, and typically at the beginning of class I would tell like a funny story about something that I was experiencing at home, or there were physicians in the course who would talk about what was happening at the hospital and things like that. And like people were sharing experiences with each other at the beginning of class or at the end of class if students stayed on to talk. And I thought that was helpful.
Going for you like you would like hang around in the classroom for 20 minutes or half an hour. Did you keep the Zoom session going for that?
Yeah, well, I would always I didn't typically start the recording for the class session until after we had finished chatting at the beginning. And then once the class time ended, I usually stop with letting them know that the recording was going to stop, but then I was happy to hang on if I could. Like sometimes I had other meetings to attend after teaching, but just leaving it open for them if they needed more time.
So let me ask you this. Was there anything that surprised you in a good way about your ability to sort of connect and communicate with students in the online teaching, not planning to be online initially approach?
I think that everyone was very open to, trying things out and being accepting of failures. Like there were a couple of exercises that I asked the students to do during the live sessions, either in the lab setting or in the live lectures, that were hard for us to work through together after they had spent some time on their own. So there's certain types of exercises that I think are good online, and then other types are not. And so, everyone was just very open-minded and flexible. And I think that both the students and myself, very flexible with deadlines and giving students extensions based on everyone's circumstances were so unusual and rapidly changing. So just that extra bit of empathy and flexibility was required on both sides. And I feel like the students were okay with like small failures because, they knew that we were all trying like our best to make a lemonade out of lemons.
Excellent. And moving in now, we're about to move into you teaching again, like resetting the sequence, moving into the third term, where this time last year you were preparing to teach on campus. Now you've had an experience teaching online and you're moving back to that setting with some updated information, having experienced it and having talked to colleagues and having been to a bunch of online sessions. What are some things that you're thinking about moving forward that you might do differently, given now that you've tried this and seen what works and what doesn't to some degree?
Yeah, I'm hoping to spend a good bit of time at the beginning of the course to get to know the students, because I won't know anyone.
I think you might do that differently, online. Did you do anything formally when you taught on campus, like have them introduce themselves in class or do an icebreaker?
Yeah, well, I know that we've talked about different various strategies over the years with trying to learn students' names and things like that. So one thing I've adopted, just because I have a really hard time memorizing names, is anytime I interact with a student, I try to ask them something about their research, because all the students' research interests are super fascinating and exciting, or something about themselves. And then once I get that piece of information, I get to learn about like the objectives that the students have for the course. And I can also use that over the course of the course to say, this particular topic is of importance to many of you because you're studying this thing, right?
Right.
So like I try to make every interaction with a student be a little bit of an information gathering session for myself. And then the students know that you're interested in them,
Sure.
And then you can help to incorporate that. And then they also become more comfortable with you.
Absolutely. Those are great thoughts.
So this year, I think I'm going to spend time at the beginning of the class to ask the students about like what their research interests are, but also to get them to describe to me some of the objectives they have for the course.
So you're going to do that more formally than just sort of waiting to see them at the beginning of class or afterwards? Are you going to formalize it so everybody in the class does this?
I think I might ask them to submit little videos.
Yeah, why not? Right. I mean, they can Zoom, right?
So that I can watch them, and then also I might have, as the beginning of every class, have the students do something fun in the chat, like either, what is your objective for the course? But another one could just be something fun, like, what did you eat for breakfast today? Or, like just something that we can all like share. Yeah, just, like some shared experience. What TV show are you watching? Whatever.
So like an icebreaker of some sort.
Yeah, like a daily icebreaker just to get everyone kind of engaged with each other. And then I'm definitely going to be using like some of the Zoom features, like the breakout rooms and things like that. And then we will be restructuring the lab sessions because the long pauses of independent work online didn't work well. So we'll be like taking what was maybe a 20-minute exercise and breaking it into 3 5-minute exercises, and then allowing the students to go away and then come back together.
So you'll come back, discuss, sort of didactic part, and then go back for another 5 minutes, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And I think that'll keep the time going, but also allow for them to engage with us more frequently.
Great. Any last words of wisdom to faculty who are going to be jumping into this for the first time in terms of?
Well, yeah, I think that you should use engagement strategies that you feel comfortable with, because we're all different personalities. And then just recognize too that the students are going to have different types of engagement strategies that they're comfortable with. So not everyone is going to be comfortable with interrupting you during a lecture. They might prefer a chat. And then, just be flexible and empathetic to the students. And I think that actually creates a really nice connection with the students, that they feel like, we have interest in their well-being, and it allows them to become more interested and engaged in the course.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for spending your afternoon with me. This is great. I think this will be a really nice resource for people who are jumping into the teaching game. And,
yeah, I'm happy to share other resources little software and things that I've heard people discuss. And many of them I haven't tried, but I'm happy to share some of those resources if people are interested.
For a second video, I think.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thanks, John.